Good evening. Thanks for joining us for the WDSU News Hot Seat. Tonight, we're talking one of the biggest topics that happened this week, the arrest and indictment of Bob Dean, the embattled nursing home owner. Just to recap the story, in the days following Hurricane Ida, about 12 people passed away at a warehouse in Tangipahoa Parish. They were all from nursing homes that Bob Dean owned. Just prior to Ida making landfall, he had evacuated 800 nursing home residents to that facility in Tangipahoa Parish. The state had to do an emergency evacuation. It has led to law changes. Generators are required at nursing homes now. All the nursing home operators have to do a plan with the state of where they evacuate people to. But this week, after 10 months, Bob Dean was charged by attorney Jeff Landry. We're going to talk more about the charges here, and we have a good panel. We have Laura Canizero Rodriguez, a former prosecutor, who's going to put back on the hat of prosecutor here and talk about how they go about prosecuting a case like this. And we have Pat Fanning, a well-known defense attorney, who's going to talk about how you go about defending Bob Dean. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty, although there are a lot of facts that have come out with this case that seem to be slightly overwhelming. So let's just go with the charges. 8 felony counts of cruelty to persons with infirmities, 5 felony counts of Medicaid fraud, and 2 felony counts obstruction of justice. Laura, if you're handling this and you handled hundreds of cases in New Orleans, what's the first thing you do? I mean, as a prosecutor, with all the video and documents that you have, does it seem open and shut?
I think that this case has very powerful evidence in terms of what we know that the victim suffered. There are extensive medical records in this case, which we expect to play a large role in the prosecution. And there are also the testimony of the workers from the Louisiana Department of Health, as well as the caretakers in the facility and the surviving victims themselves. So essentially, the prosecution has to prove in the cruelty to the infirmed that this person was the caretaker because he owned or ran the facility, and that there was criminally negligent behavior on his part in allowing these residents to be left in these terrible conditions where they were in urine and feces. They were not given proper medication. They were not getting up and moving around as they would have been required to at this age. So I expect to hear testimony from witnesses to all of that, as well as extensive medical records for the doctors who treated them and observed these conditions when they were brought in.
Pat, you're not involved with this case. That's why you're on this panel here, but you've done some high profile work with high profile defendants over your career at various courthouses. What's the first thing you do to defend somebody like this? What do you tell Bob Dean as you know he's going to get indicted here?
Well, the first thing he's got to do is prepare for trial and the sympathy that these victims and the victims' families are going to have. And I think what he's got to say is look, we have a hurricane. We have people who are sheltered and they have proper medical care, and we're doing everything we can for them. What do you do when you evacuate those people? In the St. Rita's case, the guy testified, the owner of the nursing home testified, I looked around the room and I counted. If we evacuate, that guy's going to die, that lady's going to die, that person's going to die, because you just can't move those people safely under the circumstances. So what do you do if you own a nursing home and something, natural disaster like a hurricane like this comes? Some of those people, if you'd have kept them there, had generators, had their medicine, had everything you needed for them, some of them may have died anyway during the course of the storm. The second thing, I think, if I were Mr. Dean's lawyer, I would be thinking about, if my mama was in that nursing home, those people are going to come in now, and you have to find a way to do this in a very subtle fashion. But I'd have been over there. And if I'd have seen where she was going, and if she wasn't going somewhere that I thought was suitable, I'd have taken her somewhere. I'd have done something about it. So to try to negate some of these family members coming in, you just have to ask them, well, what did you do? Did you do anything to make sure that proper treatment was being given? And if not, then maybe you shouldn't be here complaining.
And you bring up St. Rita's. I know we know what you're talking about, but that was a post-Katrina case where the owners of that St. Bernard Parish nursing home were charged. It was handled in the Baton Rouge area, and they were acquitted of any crimes. And most people thought that was an overwhelming slam dunk case against them because you had people tragically pass away. Let's go back to you, Laura. It seems like in today's world, I know we all know what happened after Katrina with this. And the only thing you can really compare it to is the St. Rita's case in St. Bernard Parish after Hurricane Katrina. It's not like this happens all the time. Jim Tucker, a former Speaker of the House, who now is in the nursing home business now from Algiers, told me something when we did a story on this a few months ago. He goes, look, we evacuated dozens of our facilities perfectly fine. We left people there. They were fine. Do prosecutors dig into that and say, look, there was really only one hiccup here. That was the Bob Dean nursing homes. Most other operators didn't deal with any major glaring problems where they had deaths. Does that play into a prosecution?
Well, sure. I think you have to think in this particular case that there was such a public outcry that this be prosecuted, because we didn't just have a guy who said, what else was I supposed to do? I'm doing my best here. He not only didn't do his best, he actually allowed the worst possible scenarios to happen, and that wasn't happening anywhere else. He doesn't just neglect them. It's not just cruelty to the infirmed we have here. We have a man who then goes above and beyond and is text messaging with the Louisiana Department of Health workers who are trying to get in and figure out what's going on here. And he prevents them from getting in and actually tells them not to cooperate. So he doesn't want them in there. He is obstructing justice. He's preventing these people from getting any help. So he's going that route in addition to the Medicaid fraud, where not only does he prevent people from getting in to help them, he leaves the conditions the way they are, but he doesn't want them transported to another facility because he will then lose the funding. Each person in his facility is a cash cow to him. If he has to transfer one of them out and give that money to another facility, that's income that he loses. So we're not just talking about a guy who was under difficult circumstances. This has happened many times. We live in southern Louisiana. Hurricanes are a natural part of the end of our summer, but we don't see people just dying wholesale in nursing homes around the state. And if the defense attorney attempts to blame the parents of the children of these elderly people, I think that would be a very poor decision in front of a jury, because as we know, many of the children can't meet the medical needs of their parents, and that's why they're in the facility. In other words, they don't have the access to prescriptions or wheelchair accessible facilities for their parents. And so they rely on these facilities to give them the care that they need. Some of these people might visit their parents daily, weekly, whatever it is, but they can't evacuate with them, or it would be to the detriment of their parents. So I just think we see an exceptional case here.
Pat, talk about this too. You told me something on the phone. We spoke earlier this week when this arrest came down, and Bob Dean we should mention, he has posted bond. He is back under his bond, living in Georgia right now, which was allowed under his bond with the judge in Tangipahoa Parish. You touched on something I thought was very interesting. This isn't New Orleans. It's not Jefferson Parish. It's not even St. Tammany. It's Tangipahoa. What element does that play into all of this? Because it's being handled by the state AG, but if this moves to trial, it's going to happen in a meet in Tangipahoa Parish.
Well, first off, Tangipahoa is a pretty conservative place, so it's a harder place to get a not guilty from a jury. But on the other hand, when St. Rita's, and I keep going back to that was in St. Bernard Parish, and that's where all the family members were of the people who died. But when it went to St. Francisville on a change of venue, I remember Jack Rowley, who was the DA in St. Bernard at the time, and Mr. Rowley, who was a great guy and a great public official, told me if that case had been tried in St. Bernard, those people would be in prison for the rest of their lives. But at least over in Tangipahoa, while it's a more conservative place, at least you don't have all the family members. Not everybody on the jury is going to know somebody who died and know somebody's family member.
Most may not. Most of these people that were evacuated came from New Orleans, Jefferson Parish, and then down the bayou. I believe it was like Lafourche and Terrebonne, areas like that. So that's an interesting point. What's next, Pat, in your opinion, for Mr. Dean? I mean, do they talk about trying to mitigate the charges down to misdemeanors or something less, or do they just stand pat and say, look, we're fighting this the whole way. If we have to go to trial, we go to trial?
It was interesting to me that even though he's charged with obstruction of justice and doing all these horrible things, he was released on bond like 30 minutes. The judge let him out on bond, and then he was allowed to go back to Georgia where he's been living. And the judge declared that he was not a flight risk. And so maybe that means that there's some room for him to go in. He's almost 70 years old. He's got poor health conditions. Maybe he can go back in and make some sort of deal. I think he's wrecked financially already. He goes in and says, just don't lock me up. Give me something other than jail time, and well, let's get rid of this case.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I know you all used to go toe to toe at Orleans Parish Criminal Court. It was always interesting to see. Laura, we'll leave you with the last word here, since, in courtrooms, prosecutors get to have the final rebuttal here. So really quickly, what's your sale to a jury? If you're prosecuting this case, and look, like I said, Mr. Dean is innocent till proven guilty. This is an arrest. These are just charges. We want to point out he is not guilty of anything until he's convicted. But what is your final sales pitch to a jury if you're a prosecutor saying, hey, let me drive this home because we think some crimes were committed here?
Look, in this particular case, I'd say I'll take any parish in the state of Louisiana and I'll try this case. I think the sales pitch is the facts of the case. We have somebody who had such disregard for these people who are considered a protected class. We consider elderly and our most in need age group to be a protected class. To watch them suffer, to know they were suffering, people's parents and grandparents sitting in feces and urine, not getting medical care, not getting to walk around. I mean, there were detailed descriptions of the smell when you walked in the facility. And this is somebody's parent or grandparent who they're not serving time for a criminal charge. This isn't prison. This is a facility where we expect them to be cared for. And we see his intent there with the other charges, which makes it even worse. It's not just negligence on his part. It's an intent to make a profit, to give them the least amount of care to make the most amount of money. So, look, if he tries to negotiate this case, and if I were him and I was his lawyer, I would certainly be trying to get any sort of negotiation I could. And perhaps the best sentence for him that wouldn't involve jail time would be for him to be sentenced to one of his own facilities, because that would be really poetic justice in this case.
All right. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Laura Cannizzaro-Rodrigue, former Orleans Parish prosecutor, has handled hundreds of cases. Pat Fanning, well-known criminal defense lawyer. Pat, you're slightly older than Laura or I, so I'm going to say you've handled thousands upon thousands of criminal cases, and that's a compliment, by the way.
Quit reminding me.
We thank you for your time. It's a serious topic with Bob Bean. You can watch this entire segment on our website, WDSU.com, starting Monday morning.